Hello, this is Charlene. We are looking at a graph. A graph is a relation because a relation is any set of ordered pairs. And all the points on this graph are part of a relation. But we're going to determine what its domain is and what its range is. And we're also going to ask ourselves, is it a function? So we're going to take care of all three of those things in this video. Okay, so let's talk about the domain first. The domain includes all the x values. All the x values are related to the x-axis, and the x-axis moves from left to right. So that is how we're going to look at our graph. We're going to say, what does this graph do from left to right? We're going to ask ourselves, where does it start? And where does it go to? So it starts right, I think that is the leftmost point of this graph is about right there. So that's where it's going to start. Well, that starting point lines up with the -4, I do believe. So that means it's going to start at -4. And then where does it go to? Well, let's see. Let's check it out. And it goes to this point right here. So that lines up with the 0. So it goes between the -4 and the 0. So that's where it goes to. Let's go ahead and write this down here. It starts at -4 and it goes to the 0. So that's literally how we're going to write it in interval notation. So let's move this down a little bit. We're going to write it starts at -4 from left to right. It goes to the 0. Now we need to determine, is it equal to the -4? Well, this graph does actually touch the -4. So we're going to say, yes, it is equal to it, which is what I call a hard box closure. It's like a closed circle. And then we're going to look at the other side. We're going to say, is it equal to the 0? Well, we've got an open circle down here at 0. So therefore, that is going to be a parenthesis, what I call a soft close, because it cannot be equal to the 0. It is equal to the -4 because it passes through that point. It is not equal to the 0 because we have an open circle right here. Okay, so let's make this a little bit smaller so we got some more room to work. And we're going to talk about how to write this in inequality format. So basically, let me erase all this stuff for you. Okay, erase, erase, erase. There we go. So basically, when we do our interval notation, we want to ask ourselves, where does our graph live? And like we noticed before, our graph lives between that -4. It lives between here and here. Our graph is this piece right here, and it lives between that -4 and that 0. So we will write it -4 and 0, and these are my domain values, which are the x values. That means an x is in the middle. So does that make sense? My x's live between -4 and 0. My graph lives between that -4 and that 0. Does that make sense at all? Okay, let's hope it does. And the way that you're going to list your inequalities, it's always going to be less than, less than. But the only one that needs to be equal to is the -4 over here, because the graph does actually touch the -4. So we're not going to have an equal to on the 0 side because we have this open circle. So this is how we list the interval notation of our domain. This is how we list the inequality version of our domain. But both of these are saying the same thing. This is a way to show what our domain is. This is another way to show what our domain is for this particular graph. So now let's talk about the range. Let's make all this stuff a little bit smaller so we get some room to work here. Okay, let's take that off. Domain. Put that up there, make that box bigger. Okay, so now let's talk about our range. Our range has to do with which x or y. Well, of course, it's the y values. So we're going to talk about the y values. The y values have to do with the y-axis, and the y-axis does not go left to right. The y-axis goes up and down. So that means that we are going to look at our graph from top to bottom, or from, I should say, bottom to top. So where does my graph start? And where does my graph go to? Well, my graph starts right there. Let's change colors here. La, 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 la. So it starts right there, and that lines up with the -4, -5, -6 lines up with the -6. That's where it starts. And where does it go to? Well, it goes to this point, which is lines up with the 6 right there. So we can't hardly see that, can you? La, 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 la. So 6 is where it goes to. So it starts at the -6, and it goes to the +6. So again, we're going to write it exactly the same way. Where does it start at the bottom? It starts at the -6, and it goes to the +6. And again, we need to look at, are they open circles or closed circles? Well, this down here is an open circle, so that means not equal to the -6. And this is also an open circle, so that means we're going to have a not equal to that as well. And just like we did on the x values for the domain, we are going to write it exactly the same way for the inequality method. We're going to do, it lives between -6 and 6, but now we're talking about our y values, so it's the y values exist between -6 and 6. It's still going to be less than, but now we're going to have all parentheses, again, because we have an open circle there at the top and an open circle at the bottom. So it starts at the -6, it goes up to the -6. That's where the graph lives, between those two numbers. And that is how we're going to write our interval notation for the range. And this is how we're going to write our inequality notation for the range. So there's two different ways to represent the domain and the range. Now we need to ask ourselves, is this graph a function? Okay, so let's think about this. We can use what we call the vertical line test to test and see if it is a function. So let's go grab our little vertical line here. Look at there. Okay, so if I put that line right there, it only touches that graph in that one spot right down here. But if I move it over a little bit to this position, then that actually tells me that it hits that graph in two different spots, right there and right there. So if we can find any spot on our graph where a vertical line hits it 2 times, that means we have repeating zeros. Repeating x's. So that means that this is not a function, because that vertical line tells us it hits it in 2 points. 2 points means repeating x's, so it is not a function. Hopefully that helps you think through this process, and we'll see you back next time. Click on the like button, click on the subscribe button.